And another candidate forum today. This is for House District 14A. And Aric Putnam, the DFLer, the challenger, is in the studio with us. Aric, welcome back once again. Aric, here, we did invite Tama Tice, and she agreed to be here, but apparently she got hung up with something, so Tama's not here. So not our traditional candidate forums we've been doing, where we have both candidates in the same room at the same time, but we'll give Tama another opportunity at some other point to come in and be on the show. So, Aric, back to a little bit about you. We were talking a little bit about how you got into this race, and let's talk a little bit. I know that you said the first time around 2 years ago, you knocked on a few doors, but you got in the race late. You're knocking on more doors this time of the round. When you're out in the district talking to residents, what are they talking about to you? What are their main concerns?
Sure, a lot of it depends on where you are and who you're talking to, but there are some themes that develop. When you knock as many doors as we have, you do kind of get some consistent ideas and consistent concerns. One thing that's kind of nice is that a lot of people are really engaged this time around, and they're really thinking about what's going on all around us in a way that didn't happen as much in the past. So it's really exciting to see people thinking more actively about particular issues. And one of the issues that always comes up when people talk to me is education. Clearly, healthcare is a big concern, and that's something we can talk about later if you like. But education, more often than not, is one of the first things that comes up. And everyone knows that our teachers need help, that our schools need help, that they're not doing as well as they can. And that's made more complicated when we get sometimes misleading statements by our current legislators about how hard they've supposedly worked for education, when in reality, we all know our schools are struggling, and we all know how important they are to our future. So education is really one of those big concerns. And the way that I approach it is I think that we need to be more responsible about education, more transparent, more engaged in education. We need more adults in buildings to mentor young people. When you think about the problems we have with mental health, with job preparedness, with college preparedness, with all those different issues in the public schools, those can really be remedied in a lot of ways just by having more adults there to catch problems before they develop and they get more difficult. Minnesota has the fourth worst ratio of guidance counselors to students in the entire country. Minnesota deserves better than that. We used to be one of the best states in the country for education, and now we have one guidance counselor for 732 students. That's a horrible burden to put on that one counselor, especially when they've got other kinds of responsibilities like paperwork and testing administration. So who is going to be there to help mentor our kids to become good, productive citizens and healthy human beings? It's not happening now, and it has to happen soon.
Speaking of that, of course, the national test scores just recently came out a couple weeks ago, and there were 3 schools in the St. Cloud Area School District that were listed on the list of underperforming, 3 of 48 schools in the entire state, I think. This would be in your district. So how would you help elevate District 742 schools to a higher level, get them off that underperforming list? Do you see the legislature playing a role in that?
No, absolutely, absolutely. And part of it has to do with why we're in the situation that we are right now. I think one of the things that legislators don't do enough is do research into the cause of a problem before they suggest a solution. And if you look at education funding specifically, and I'm not saying it's just about money, but if we start with that and we look at the resources that go to our public schools, you had a slash in education funding in the first part of the 2000s. And since then, our legislature has failed to catch up with that. Just recently, this past biennium, the committee on which my opponent sits and recommended a 1% increase in the general formula. The governor, however you feel about him, he's done some good stuff, he's done some bad stuff, but the governor is the one who stepped up and said that the 2% should be the increase in the general formula against the wishes of our representatives. Wanted to put a little bit more resources into the schools. And yet at 2%, that's still well below inflation. So when we have to catch up and we're not catching up, we're being left behind. And that's putting extra stress on the teachers and the administrators and the paras and everyone who works in our schools. So, but the other thing I want to say, because I think it's very important, is that our teachers are working incredibly hard. Our administrators are working incredibly hard. And we have fantastic people doing wonderful things in our public schools. If you just look at Tech High School, if you subtract the populations that are English language learners or emotionally behaviorally disabled or disturbed, you take out those populations, and Tech has better test scores than Sartell High. But we don't know that. We don't acknowledge the great things that are happening in 742. And we don't support them enough. So yeah, the things that I think that we need to do immediately is to get more adults in the schools. And also look at some of the stuff that the legislature tried to do that was patently ridiculous. This idea of shifting to a 5-star rating system for public schools based exclusively on test scores with no context or understanding of what those test scores are. That would have horrible implications on our struggling schools, because those 3 schools you just mentioned would, of course, not get great stars, and then they get fewer resources, and then with fewer resources, those problems exacerbate. So there's tons the legislature can do, should do, must do that they're not doing that I would like to do when I'm in office.
Let's talk about higher education. Obviously,
Sure.
you work out at St. John's, a very well to do liberal arts school. I mean, it's highly ranked in every category you can think of. But there is this skills gap that we have going on in Minnesota, in our country right now. Yesterday, the state came out. We have a 2.9% unemployment rate. It's crazy low. But how do we close that gap? I mean, it's not going to happen by going to St. John's University, I mean, partly, but we need the tech schools involved. We need to have others, technical skills training. How would we fix that if you were there in St. Paul next year?
Sure, absolutely. I think that we first need to start talking about post-secondary education rather than simply vocational or four-year education. Because if you look at the jobs that are out there that we need people to fill, the jobs not just of today, but the jobs of tomorrow, those require some degree of post-secondary education. I know there's a push towards doing more trades education in high school, and I think that's not a bad idea. But by and large, I mean, seriously, all of us think about this. If you had picked a career when you were 14, most of us would be ballerinas or cowboys. That's even worse, and perhaps more seriously, if when you were 14 you decided to be a refrigerator mechanic and you worked at Electrolux, what's happening now? So we need to prepare people for post-secondary education that makes them more flexible, that isn't exclusively about doing one single job, but it's about getting the skills and the abilities to not just do a job, but to make new jobs. When you look at our economy locally in St. Cloud, something like 14 or 15% of these jobs that we have, all the jobs, twice any other category, they're retail and non-skilled manufacturing jobs. They're decent jobs, but they're not jobs that grow with you as you get older. They're not jobs that help you improve your circumstances. They're jobs that let you just stay where you're at. They're not bad jobs. I want to say that again. But I think we need to be more aspirational. We need to be less reactive. We need to prepare for the future rather than to respond to bad things happening in the present.
Let's talk a little bit about St. Cloud specifically. I mean, obviously we're a huge retail center here, and we all know brick and mortar retail's not doing all that well. So as big stores like Sears and some of those stores close their doors here in town, how do you think we should be reacting to that here in the St. Cloud metro area, which is right the heart of your district? Well,
that's exactly my concern, is that if we're not thinking about fostering entrepreneurship and business development and more skilled manufacturing jobs, we're going to get stuck, because we're going to design our policies to make sure that everyone can wait tables at Applebee's or do retail at Sears, which is a fine, grand job. But what's going to happen in 5-10 years? We need to be more optimistic, more hopeful, have some vision, and say, how can we build the robots here that were built in South Carolina that took our Electrolux jobs away? Not how can we put in necessarily just some more manufacturing jobs, but how do we build a context wherein we've got innovation and research and development occurring here at a greater clip than we currently do?
So we're almost out of time, Aric. So let's just talk a little bit about, again, we kind of opened up the show with how you got into this race. It's your second time around for this seat. Talk a little bit about your reasons why you think it's important for everyday citizens like you to put yourself, your life, your family out on the line, out on the limb, and run for a political office in this crazy world we live in these days in politics. Why did you and your wife ultimately and your kids decide this is something that you should do?
The way you just put that, maybe I shouldn't have. You make it sound pretty miserable. It's not. I mean, it has its highs and lows and it's difficult, but it's so incredibly important. I mean, when I think of what I do when I teach, and I don't just teach at St. John's and St. Ben's, I also teach in our public schools on occasion. I donate my spring break every year to teach an English class for a whole week in the public schools. I teach our teachers how to teach about citizenship and democracy. I give workshops, not just in 742, but I've done them in Sartell. I've done them all around the state, these workshops of teaching teachers how to teach about citizenship and democracy. Because I think that's what public schools are for. It's very important, especially in our community. Everyone needs to learn how to be a better citizen. And so we've done that in our campaign, too. Our opponent who's supposed to be representing us hasn't held a single town hall in 7 years. I've held 8 in 8 months. Every single month, I pick a theme. I invite local experts. We meet together at the library, as many public people as we can, and we have a conversation about an issue so that we all get a deeper understanding of the issue. And we also meet each other. And we talk about these kinds of things. I can't tell you how many times I've talked to someone when I knocked on their door, and they've said, I'm the only person on my block who believes this. I want to say, no, you're not. I just talked to someone right across the street who said exactly the same thing you did. And I know you play bridge all the time, but you never talk about public issues. And that's partially because of the failure of our politicians to inspire those kinds of conversations. I mean, I really do think that a good politician's a lot like a doctor. You know a good doctor because everybody's healthy and they don't need the doctor. The same thing is true about politics and civic engagement, is that we need people to get out there, do the job, and then go away. I think we need to have term limits. And there should be a responsibility of people who are sitting in office to inspire civic engagement in other people, to motivate other people to become involved so that you don't have to keep doing the job because other people need to do it too. And we're not doing that enough. And that's a big part of why I'm running, is to help inspire people, to motivate people to get more involved in public issues.
And we need to be able to, we have to get back to the place as a society where we can talk about issues and have opposing views, and it doesn't end up in a big fight.
Right.
Just have a conversation, and if you agree to disagree, that's fine, but you don't have to hate each other when it's done. You can just agree to disagree that you don't believe the same thing. And it's okay if you don't all get along, you know?
I absolutely
just
believe
be
that
civil to each other. That's all I want, is just
right.
people to be nice to each other. So, all right, Aric, we're out of time. Thank you so much for coming in. Aric Putnam is the Democratic challenger for House District 14A. November 6th is the election day, but of course, actually voting, early voting started today, so people can go out and vote today if they want to. Yeah. Aric, thanks for coming in. Nice to meet you, and good luck the rest of the way.
Thanks for having me, Jim. I really appreciate it. And just quickly, just so you guys know, there are lots of these other forums that are coming up where hopefully you'll have a chance to see both of us talk about public issues.